what if I told you that using willpower to control your food intake is actually the reason that you end up going on these binges and having these massive cravings? No matter how much you want not to eat, you just can't help it. If you're watching this video, you likely have been experiencing binge eating and cravings that just feel completely out of control. This is something that I commonly see in my coaching practice. It's a common area of concern for women. These women usually come to me feeling completely helpless, feeling completely out of control, ashamed, disappointed in themselves, and like they're a failure because of not being able to control themselves around certain foods. So in today's video, I am going to be talking about why this happens. Why do you go through a period of eating really clean or dieting and then just completely break it with a massive binge? I'll also be talking about why you experience cravings for foods that you are trying not to eat, and then also leave you with some practical tips on how you can have a more peaceful relationship with food and basically just not experience those binges that make you feel so out of control anymore. So let's get right into it. To begin, we'll start by unpacking what is the root cause of binge eating and these types of food cravings. So diet culture has been really successful at making us feel really scared of food, particularly the types of foods that we usually associate with disease and with weight gain. And because of this, instead of viewing food as, something that brings people together, that allows us to experience different cultures and also as a source of pleasure, we pretty much look at food as the enemy. Either you look at food as something that's going to make you gain weight, or you look at food as something that's going to make you unhealthy, or maybe a combination of the two. This has the effect of making us feel like we can't trust ourselves around food. Like we can't trust the foods that our body says, okay, I'm hungry, I want you to eat this for lunch. We can't trust ourselves around those forbidden foods because if we give ourselves permission to eat them, we'll just eat them in abundance and we'll ruin everything that we've been working on. We think, or we've been led to believe that we need to, do the most with willpower to prevent ourselves from eating these foods that are going to make us gain weight and unhealthy. So what if I told you that using willpower to control your food intake is actually the reason that you end up going on these binges and having these massive cravings? Let me explain what I mean a little bit. So when you cut your calories or you restrict certain foods, you put things off limits, maybe you cut carbs, or you tell yourself that you're not eating any refined sugar, or whatever else it could be. Psychologically, what happens is that thing that you put off limits actually becomes more desirable. It becomes a whole lot more attractive the second you tell yourself that you can't have it. So let's say, for example, that you've got a packet of biscuits in your cupboard and you have a rule that Monday to Saturday 6 p.m. you are eating extremely clean, which means no biscuits, no forbidden foods, right? But at 6 p.m. on Saturday, you're allowed to eat one biscuit. You might find that literally the entire week, you cannot stop thinking about that biscuit. You're having cravings for that biscuit. And maybe even come Wednesday, your willpower collapses and you just end up eating the biscuit. And because, you have these super rigid rules around when you can eat it, the fact that you eat it before you made yourself allowed to eat it gives you a lot of shame, a lot of disappointment. You feel like a failure because you can't stick to the guidelines that you've made for yourself. So that's the one aspect of why we have cravings for foods that we've put off limit and why we can end up breaking the rules that we've made. But then secondly, on a more biological level, when you cut your calories or you put a certain food group off limits, what happens is that your body ultimately goes into starvation mode. So let's say you've been dieting and you cut your calories to 1,200 a day, which is really way too little for the average adult woman. Your body thinks, you know what, this girl is not giving me enough food, so I need to just basically shut everything down that isn't essential, right? So functions in your body like digestion get shut down because that's not essential for survival. Your reproductive system slows down and eventually can shut down because that's also not necessarily, procreation is not essential for survival. So your metabolism goes down and any food that you are consuming gets stored in the body as fat to be reconverted to energy at a later point in life, because basically your body thinks that you're in a famine and that it doesn't know when you'll next be able to feed yourself. So you have to be able to store food, store energy for a later point in time. But because we're not actually in a famine, we're just putting ourselves in this starvation famine-like condition through dieting, cutting calories, cutting out food groups without necessarily a medical reason for doing so. Your body will eventually release really powerful hunger signaling hormones that are going to give you this sort of out of control feeling, and that will be the start of a binge episode. And when you do, eventually lose your willpower, more like your body just forcing you to eat, you will eat all of those foods that you were trying not to eat. You'll eat the biscuits, you'll eat the peanut butter, you'll eat the ice cream. And why these foods? Because these are the foods that are really dense in energy. And I like to use the word energy instead of calories, because calorie is just a unit of, measurement for energy. These are the foods that are really dense in energy, and without eating a lot of the food in terms of quantity, you can get a lot of energy. And remember, your body isn't sure of when you're going to feed it again. So it wants to get in as much energy as it can to be able to reuse as fuel in the future when your food intake or your energy intake goes down again. So that would explain why you find yourself binging after trying to be really good for an extended period of time. Maybe that's a couple of days or a few weeks, and when you do eventually get to that binge, you just feel completely out of control. You can't control yourself. It's like no matter how much you want not to eat, you just can't help it. That's because of the biological mechanisms that are happening. It's not because you're a failure. It's not because you don't have willpower. It's just because diets or calorie restriction, food group restriction is not meant to be a long-term thing. The body does not like that long-term. So now that we know this, now that we know why when we actually put ourselves on any sort of food restriction, we're actually just setting ourselves up to fail, what then can we do about it? So I'll share with you a principle that you can use to restore harmony in your relationship with food, and then I'll give you some practical tips for how to put that principle in action. The principle that I'll be sharing with you today is called food neutrality, and that basically just means looking at all foods as neutral, looking at them equally. Now, this doesn't mean that we are saying that an apple is nutritionally equivalent to, let's say, a donut, but it does mean that we're stripping away all of the moral connotations that we place on the apple as being a good food, and we're stripping away all of the moral connotations that we've put on a donut as being a bad food, right? Which means that we're removing all of the guilt, shame, disappointment from eating the donut, and we are removing all of the proud of myself, you go girl, for eating the apple. Not to say that, we can't be proud of ourselves for taking care of ourselves. So when we look at foods as neutral, it essentially means that we don't put any foods off limits. We allow ourselves the, freedom to eat an apple whenever we want to eat an apple, and eat a donut whenever we want to eat a donut. And if you have been in an extended phase of restriction, when you take away all of the food rules and allow yourself to eat whatever, whenever, you might find in the early stages that you're eating a lot of those forbidden foods, which it might confirm the belief that you've had that If I, just allow myself to eat whatever I want, I'll only eat those foods that I'm trying to avoid. But the reason that this might be happening is, remember, you have been essentially in an extended phase of deprivation, and your body is just trying to restore balance, restore all of the energy that it's been lacking, restore all of the pleasure that it's been lacking on that psychological level. So you might, end up eating those foods in abundance and eating less of the more nutritional foods. But over time, you will notice that if you continue to give yourself this freedom, your tastes will evolve, and your taste buds and your desires, the foods that you want will become more diverse to include, the fun foods as well as the more nutritious foods. So you'll eventually be able to reach a point where, it's lunchtime, you're hungry, and you're like, I want a salad to go with my lunch, and that will be a normal thing. It's not going to be something that you're forcing yourself to do, because ultimately your body wants to be nourished. Your body wants to eat those foods that will give it, the essential micronutrients and the macronutrients that you need to basically function well. Something that can help you to, put this into practice and evaluate your progress along the way is keeping a food journal. Food journaling was really helpful for me as I was healing my relationship with food. And when I say food journaling, I do not mean tracking the exact quantities of foods that you're eating, weighing your food, tracking your calories. That is not what I'm talking about, and that is not at all what I'm suggesting that you do. What I am suggesting that you do is a more holistic, form of food journaling, where you track the foods that you eat, you track how you felt when you were eating, you track the thoughts that you were having before and after you ate, to give yourself a well-rounded picture of how you are faring as you are, working on your healing. Things that you might want to look out for when you are reviewing your food journal is, okay, when last did I have a binge? When last did I experience, cravings? When last did I feel out of control around food? Other things that you can notice are, okay, how diverse is the foods that I'm eating currently? Am I still in that phase where I'm mostly eating those foods that I had been restricting previously? Or am I progressing to have a, wider and more balanced diet? So that will allow you to assess your progress. And while you are food journaling, remember to be kind to yourself. Do not be hard on yourself. Don't try to rush the process. It is different for everybody. And I will just also offer a disclaimer that if you have a medical condition, like for example, I have PCOS, this might look a little bit different for you, in which case it would be quite helpful to work alongside a professional who can help you work on achieving food freedom, but whilst also making sure that you are meeting your specific body and nutrition needs for the health condition that you have. So those are my tips for breaking the diet binge cycle, really just coming back into equilibrium and a healthy relationship with food in your body. And if you would like to learn more about how you can make peace with food, make peace with your body, all whilst maintaining a lifestyle of health without obsession, subscribe to my weekly newsletter, where I give you more personalized educational and coaching resources for this exact purpose. The link will be in my description box. So thank you so much for tuning into this video. I will see you next week.